Hello my friends, I'm happy to invite you to our first ever community knit-along. Over the course of 3 weeks, we'll be making a pair of sneaker socks together. I'll be making them here and recording every step of the process. Then I'll turn these recordings into video tutorials and I'll share them with you so that you could make your own pair of these super comfortable low-cut socks in your own happy knitting spot. There are very few things you need to follow along. You will need some sock yarn, and for most sizes you will need just 150 gram, that's 1.7 ounces ball of yarn. You will need a long circular needle in size 2.5 millimeters, US size 1.5. Then you will also need a locking stitch marker or a safety pin, just like the one I have over here, a wool needle, a ruler or a measuring tape, and scissors. You will also need a copy of the sneaker socks pattern to know how many stitches and rounds to work to make the socks in any of the 7 sizes available, from the toddler size to the large adult size. The pattern is available as an instant download at 10roseaday.com/sneaker-socks. In the first part of the knit along, we're gonna cast on stitches and shape the toe part of the sock, just as it is instructed in the first 3 steps of the pattern. Okay, let's make those socks, shall we? It starts with a slip knot, so make a simple slip knot, a loop, and then go in there and pull the strand in the middle, or use any other way that you know how to make a slip knot, doesn't really matter at all. Then place the slip knot on one of the needles, and I will be using a long circular needle and the magic loop technique, but you can use 2 shorter circular needles, or you can even use double pointed needles. But keep in mind that it could be uncomfortable to work the first few rounds if you use double pointed needles, so just bear that in mind and maybe give it a try to use the magic loop technique like I do. So the slip knot is on the needle, and now we need to cast on more stitches, and we'll use the seamless cast on to make sure the toe part of the sock looks exactly the same as the starting point of the sock looks exactly the same as the rest of the sock. So how do we do that? Make a loop with the working yarn at the back of the yarn that comes from the needle, like this, and then rotate the loop a bit to put it on the needle, and then pull it tight. This way the working yarn is at the back of the work. See, it's not coming forward, it's going backwards, and that's the way we want it. And now let's do it again. So make a loop, place it on the needle, hold this loop and pull it tight. Don't pull it too tight. The stitches should be loose enough to easily travel on the needle. And if you're using double pointed needles, then make them even looser, because it could be, like I said, quite uncomfortable to work the first rows with the first rounds with the double pointed needles. So keep casting on stitches until you get as many stitches as you need for the size you are making, as instructed in step 1.1 of the pattern. Okay, that was the last stitch for me, and remember when you count the stitches that the slip knot, the first stitch that you see on the needle, that one does not count because we'll unravel it shortly. So now that we have the number of stitches we need, here's what we do. Turn the work so that the edge is at the top of the needle, just like I did right now. And then hold the stitches and pull the needle until the stitches are about at the center of the cable of the needle, or somewhere around there. And then pick up the yarn, and now we're gonna get another set of stitches, but we're gonna pick them up from the strands between stitches. So we find the strand that is between the first 2 stitches, and it would be this strand, and then we insert the needle, the one that is in your right hand, we insert it from front to back under that strand. Then we pick the yarn, just simply without wrapping it in any fancy way. We simply pick it and pull it through this strand like this. And that's our stitch. And then we do it again, picking up one stitch from every strand between stitches, just like this. It's a fairly simple task. Could be a bit uncomfortable because now you kind of strangled between two sets of stitches, and that's when the double pointed needles are not recommended. But if you're a brave soul, then of course you can give it a try. But it is much more convenient to do it with the cable of the needle, so it should be either a long circular needle or two shorter circular needles. Okay, so we keep picking up and we stop when we come to the slip knot, and that's gonna be right now. Okay, so we have the stitches that we need for the sock on the needles, both sets of stitches, both halves of the stitches, and now we rotate the work so that the stitches that we've just picked up are at the bottom of the work, and the ones that we initially cast on are at the top, just like this. Now arrange stitches for working in the magic loop technique or just generally for working in the round. So I'll pull the bottom needle out and I pull the cable of the top part of the needle so that the stitches of the top part of the top set of the stitches, they are on the top needle. And now we take the yarn and we get started to work our first round. The first round will be easy, but before we get to knitting, we should unravel this slip knot. See, now it is at the tip of the needle and you simply slide it, but when you do that, make sure that you hold this part of the work, because this stitch is secured by the strand that is attached to the slip knot, and once we unravel it, this stitch might also unravel, so we should not let it happen. So slip it carefully like this and carefully unravel, but see, I'm holding these stitches, I don't want to lose it. So unravel it and then grab the yarn. Just make sure it's not the tail like I did right now. That's not good. So make sure you are taking the yarn and the tail is hanging down, and then pull the needle out and start working on the first round. Here's what happens in the first round. These stitches, they were cast on in a bit of funny way. So now the first half of the stitches would be twisted, and twisted quite unusually. So we need to untwist them first and then knit them through the back loop. Here's how it happens. Insert the tip of the right needle from the back, like this, into the stitch, then slip it off the needle, untwist it, place it back, and knit it through the back loop. So that's a bit of a complicated maneuver, but it's totally doable. So let's do it again. We go from the back, untwist that stitch, place it back, and even without taking the right needle out of the stitch, see, I'm simply knitting it through the back loop. And we do it again and again until we untwist and knit all stitches of the first half of the stitches, of the first group of the stitches. And here's the last one. This guy is especially twisted because it's twisted twice. So we have to untwist it once and then knit it through the back loop. And now the first half of the stitches is all knit. Now we rearrange the work for working on the second half of the stitches. And the second half of the stitches is just simple knitting, no surprises there. Nothing to untwist, they are all facing the right way, and we can simply knit them stitch by stitch through the front loop like we usually do. And that's it, pretty easy. So we finished, we knit both sets of the stitches, and now we finished the first step of the pattern, and we set up work for making the sock. Before we move on, let's attach the marker. I usually use just a simple safety pin because I don't like thicker markers. I find that they leave holes in the knitting. So I usually, when I make socks and I use a fine yarn, then I will use just a safety pin. But you know, any marker will do. It's just here to mark the beginning of the round. So whatever you attach there is good. We are not relying on the tail because in many cases I would just skip the marker altogether and just rely on the tail. But in this case, it's not a good idea because the tail is going to be hidden. In fact, it could be quite annoying. So I suggest that we can hide it right away in the second round of the work. You don't have to. You can wait until the sock is done or until at least the toe part of the sock is done. But usually it annoys me. So I try to hide the tail right in the second round and just be done with it so it's not getting in the way. But before we hide the tail, let's first do the increases because the second round is the increasing round. In this round we're going to start shaping the toe, and the toe part is shaped in two stages. First, we're going to do rapid increases. We're going to increase in every round, and then we'll do it every other round to make sure that the shaping of the toe part of the sock is very close to the natural shaping of the toe part of the human foot, and so that the socks are comfortable to wear. So increasing round, we knit one stitch, and this time there is no need to untwist anything because all stitches are facing in the right way. So we simply knit it, and then we make one increase. So make one, that means we are making an increase from the strand between stitches, right? And at this point it doesn't matter whether you make one left or make one right, but usually make one left is easier, so I choose the easier thing, and I usually make one left just like this. And then we're gonna knit all stitches until we get to the last stitch of the first half of stitches. And while we are simply knitting, that's the time when I prefer to hide the tail. So I simply twist the tail with the working yarn after every stitch, just like I did right now. So I knit a stitch and then I twist it again the other way around, or the same in the same direction, doesn't really matter. As long as it is woven into the fabric, it's all good with me. So I'll simply just keep twisting the tail with the working yarn and hide it, and then it won't bother me at all. Maybe one more stitch and then I'll be ready to simply cut the tail. Okay, so you don't have to do that. That's like multitasking basically. So we are working on the project and we are weaving in the tail. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, if you feel that you have to focus on one task, then it's totally fine. You can do it later on when you are when the project is finished and you're you know, weaving in tails, or when you simply, when you finish the toe part of the sock, doesn't really matter. But for me, you know, I find it really annoying when it gets in the way, so I try to deal with it right away and then relax and simply focus on the sock. Okay, just a couple more stitches and here we go. And now we make one again, and again I make one left because it's easier. And you probably noticed that I make one left in different ways when I make it at the right side of the work and the left side of the work. I really don't have an explanation for that. It's just the way that, probably a habit, I guess, one of those, you know, little things that every one of us has. So mine is to make one left in two different ways. But the resulting increase is the same. It's just the way that I make it is just different. So do it the way that you like. And like I said, if you don't like make one left, make one right, it doesn't really matter. At this point, it's not going to show at all and no one will pay attention, you know, at small things like that. So don't bother, make whatever is easier for you, because it is quite a tedious task to start on the sock and to make the toe part of the sock. So just make your life easier and make it the way that is simpler for you. So again, we do the same thing. As you see, I knit one, now I make one, and I knit the rest of the stitches until I get to the last stitch, and then I'll make one again and knit the last stitch. And here we go. This is the make one again. So I pick the strand, knit it through the back loop, and knit the last stitch of the round. So that was the increasing round, and now we keep repeating this round until we get the number of stitches that is mentioned in the step 2 of the pattern. So basically you just go, you don't count rounds, you count stitches, because in every round we add 4 stitches. We add 2 stitches at one side of the first group of the stitches, and then we add 2 stitches over here. So with every round we add 4 stitches, and simply count the number of stitches. It will be just a few rounds until you get the number that is mentioned in the pattern for your size, and then we'll get relaxed a bit, because we'll be increasing in every other round. So one round would be kind of vacation, so we'll be just knitting all stitches without thinking about increases. But until we get there, until we get the number of stitches we need, we have to increase in every round. This is my last increasing round in this part of shaping, when we increase stitches in every round. I counted my stitches. I know that now I have the number that is recommended in the pattern for the size I'm making. And let's take a look at the work. So like I said, it takes only few rounds. See, that's not really a big part, but we do rapid increases at each side of the sock to make the shaping that is the most comfortable for our feet. And another thing that happened, you see, because we were making more rounds over here, so the work built up, it is a good idea to push the sock so that it forms this kind of sock-like, shaping. And that will help you avoid the holes at the sides, because when the shaping is more or less flat, of the sock, then the sides won't be all kind of torn apart. So it will be easier for you to keep the tension at the sides of the work. And it also shows that we are making progress, right? That also feels good. So now, after all the hard work of increasing and starting the sock, here's the round where we can relax. This round, we simply knit all stitches in the round, and that's called a plain round, because we're not doing anything fancy, just knitting and relaxing and getting ready for the next round. That will be the increasing round. And these are the last stitches of my plain round, the round where we can relax and just enjoy knitting and not think about anything else. And after this round, we're gonna do the increasing round again, and we're gonna alternate the plain round, increasing round, plain round, increasing round, on and on and on, until we get the number of stitches that is mentioned at the end of the second step of the pattern. So the increasing round is the same as we did just a while ago. So we knit the first stitch, then we make one increase, and then we knit all stitches until we get to the last stitch of the first half of the stitches. Then we'll make the increase again and knit the last stitch of the first half of the stitches. Then we'll repeat the same thing on the second half of the stitches. So basically, you know the drill. I'm just repeating that to make things clear. So another increase for me at the end of the first group of stitches, the first half of stitches. If you use double pointed needles and you divided stitches into 4 groups, then when I say the first group of stitches, just keep in mind that I mean the first half of stitches. So we are looking at not at the quarters but at halves. So for you, if it's double pointed needles, then you will think in 2 groups of stitches, so 2 quarters, right, to make a half of stitches. So the second part of the increasing round, again, we are making increases and then knitting all stitches to the last stitch of the round. And here we go, the last increase over here. And this is the end of the increasing round. Now rearrange the work and then work the plain round and then increasing round and then plain round again and increasing round, like I said, until you get the number of stitches that is required for the size you're making, and this number is mentioned at the end of the second step of the pattern. This is my last increasing round. I now have the number of stitches I need for my size, and basically the shaping of the toe part is done in terms of kind of flaring out and adding stitches. So this is the shape of the toes, but it still doesn't look like really a toe part of a regular sock, right? So we're gonna work in plain rounds, just knitting all stitches on and on and on until we get a few more rounds and the toe part looks kind of nicer, I would say, like more usual than this kind of short toe part. And this time when we are working, basically it's simple, it's kind of knit all stitches in every round, nothing complicated at all. But this time we're gonna rely on measuring the sock. So we're gonna work those plain rounds until we get the measurement that is recommended in the pattern for the size we are making. And to measure the sock, I want to show you how to do it. It is important to measure only the part that is under the needle. So basically you would place a ruler so that the 0 point is at the bottom of the needle, see? And then you look at the bottom of, like, you know, where the bottom of the work is, and then you see how much is the measurement. And then you work those plain rounds on and on and on until the measurement is where you need it to be, depending on the size you are making. So for me, it's still quite a bit of knitting to do, and get started. And that's a pleasant kind of knitting because you don't have to worry about increasing, you don't have to worry about counting anything. You simply stop every now and then after a few rounds and measure the work the way that I just showed you, and then when the work is as long as you need it to be according to the pattern instructions, then you stop, and then we'll do one funny thing. And this will probably be my last round. Let's double check. I measured earlier and it seems that I'm getting my 4.5 centimeters that I should have, but your measurement will be different depending on the size you're making. So I want to double check before I move on with the pattern. Okay, I'm gonna grab the ruler, it's right here. And just as we discussed earlier, so I placed the ruler so that the 0 is aligned with the fabric underneath the needle, and then I place it closer to the work, and yes, it seems that I'm pretty happy with this. I think I have those 4.5 centimeters right here. So I'm all good. I'm gonna stop knitting the plain rounds for now, and first I'm gonna tell you why we go by measuring and as opposed to counting the rounds, because you know we want the sock to fit and everyone has a different gauge, and very few of us, frankly, actually check the gauge before starting to make socks. But even if we do check the gauge, still during the process of knitting, some rows could be, some rounds could be looser, others could be tighter. So the gauge is very kind of personal and human thing, so it could change a bit. By going, by measuring the sock, by looking at the actual measurement in centimeters or inches, we are making sure that the sock will fit, so that it will be long enough to fit on the foot, but not too long to slip off the foot when we don't need it to slip off the foot, right? So having said that, counting rounds is also important when you're working on socks one at a time, just like we do right now. So when we make one sock, we're going to make the other sock, right? So they usually come in pairs. And to make sure that this section of the sock is the same on the other sock, I highly recommend to count the rounds. You can count the rounds from the very beginning. You can do it on the right side of the work, or you can turn the sock inside out and count them here. Or you can count the rounds starting from the last increase, and you can see clearly where this spot is, so you can count those plain rounds and make notes in the pattern right next to that step, the third step of the pattern. Right next to it, make a note about the number of rounds, so that you remember when you're making the second sock, you remember to make exactly the same number of rounds, and then you don't even have to measure, because they would be still approximately the same. Even though like I said, the tension changes, and depending on the mood and different other factors, still the socks will be approximately the same. So now let's get to the funny thing that I promised you earlier, and that funny thing would be making a faux seam. Why I think it is funny? Because, well, frankly, it is quite ridiculous to add a seam looking something to a perfectly seamless sock. But you know what, when I was designing these socks, the first pair I made, it didn't have the faux seam. I just was making the toe part and then moved to the foot part, and then it looked kind of naked, kind of empty. And in the second pair that I made, I added the faux seam, and I compared the two, and I actually loved the faux seam much better than I loved the look of the sock without it. So this step is optional. It's totally up to you. You don't have to add the faux seam, but I find that it looks better and kind of more natural, because we are used to see the socks, that are manufactured by machines, and they do have that seam over there. It's not like we try to kind of mimic those socks. No, we try to not to irritate anyone, especially if you're making socks for a non-knitter. They might be puzzled, like something is missing, there is something that should be there. So just for that reason, we are making the faux seam, and the faux seam is a really simple task. We're gonna purl all stitches of the first half of the stitches. So the first half of the stitches will be dedicated to the top part of the sock. The bottom would be the second half of the stitches, and we'll get to that next time when we shape the heel. So we will work on this part mostly of the stitches, but now we're going to work on the first half of the stitches, and that's going to be the top of the sock, and we're going to purl these stitches, just these stitches. So we purl the first half of the stitches and then knit the second half of the stitches, and we do it twice. So this is our faux seam round. So we purl all stitches over here until we get to the end of the first half of the stitches, and then we'll knit the stitches of the second half. Okay, the last stitches of the first half, see, it's all purled, and now I rearrange the work to work on the second half of the stitches, and I'm gonna knit those just in a moment. Okay, here we go. And now we knit these stitches, because we don't want any ridges, any faux seams or whatever on the at the bottom of the sock, right? We want it to be plain, and we want it to be comfortable, because those ridges, they could cause uncomfortable feelings, and that's not something we are striving towards, right? Okay, and this is our faux seam round. Now we rearrange the work for working on the same round, and we on the next round, and then we repeat the same round again. So we work the faux seam round twice. So we have 2 rounds of purls over here at the top part of the sock. So same thing, we purl all stitches on the first half of the stitches, and then we knit the rest of the stitches. And here we go. the last stitch of the second 4 seam round. That gives us this quite nice actually seam looking ridge at the top part of the sock. And the bottom of the sock, see, it's all flat, just straight stockinette stitch. That's it for this part of the knit along. The fourth step of the pattern will be our homework. So what's going to happen? We will work for a few rounds in plain knitting. Then we'll work some more in ribbing, one by one ribbing, and then we'll work again in plain knitting, making the foot part of the sock. Remember to count the rounds after every segment, like plain knitting, then one by one ribbing, plain knitting, and make notes in the pattern. So you make the second sock that is exactly the same as the first sock. And all measurements that are in the pattern, they are all given for measuring the sock from the cast on edge, from here. So just like we did a short time ago, when you measure the work, you align the 0 on the ruler with the work underneath the needle, and then you look what is the measurement over here at the bottom of the work. So that's how you measure. And by that time, when you knit and you work in the one by one ribbing, well, I hope you will start enjoying the process, and you will get ready for the second step of the knit along, and that's going to be shaping the heel. That's it. Now the toe part is well shaped, and we can relax and enjoy making the foot part of the sock and get ready for the next segment of the knit along, shaping the heel. The slightly unusual shaping of the heel is the main reason why the sneaker socks do not slip off the feet. And next time I'll show you every little detail of this shaping. Thank you for watching this video and have a wonderful week. I'll see you in the next tutorial.